Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
This is True Crime Cast. Jamie here with John, ready to talk a little crime. What's up?
Dude, not a whole lot. We just got back from our respective fall breaks. I'm sure we'll catch up on each of those on this week's Bless Their Hearts episode. Hopefully I'm not speaking for you, but I just assume we're going to do that and make our vacations a tax break, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Got to work all the angles. You know what I'm saying? We went on very different trips, but we're both back and ready to tackle what's in front of us. And there's a lot going on in the crime world, trying to keep people posted on TikTok. We also post on other channels, but that's kind of the predominant one for big breaking news. The one I posted today, which would have been yesterday when you're hearing this, was the Mount Everest hikers that we covered about the controversy. They found one of their boots.
So does that prove anything, or do we still? It
doesn't yet. It's higher than they had found before, but it lets them, now they believe and have hope that they are going to find more evidence that will prove it one way or another. So step in the right direction.
All right. That's funny. That's a play on words because they found the guy's boot and foot.
Actually, they found his foot. Yeah. I mean, his foot was there and his name was written in his sock.
How convenient.
Right. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah.
So if you're going to hike in a deadly place, make sure you put your name in your socks and undies.
Was it a 12-year-old at church camp that just broke away and was trying to hike Everest? Because
I don't think so. But I do have a couple of new 5-star reviews that have come in since we last recorded. This comes from Allie V16. I've been listening to this podcast since 2018 when I made my long drives from Columbus to Cleveland, and it's been my favorite show ever since. I now listen on my way to and from work, and the true crime to-goes are perfect for my shorter drives around town. I'd love for you guys to cover the case of Carnell Sledge and Catherine Brown. It's been unsolved for 5 years. Thank you both for all the hard work you put into making these awesome episodes.
All right. Thank you so much. And we will definitely add that to our list. We have like a Google Doc that we share with our writing team, and we always update that. So thank you very much.
Will do.
All right, Jamie. No new Patreon members this week rather, but don't forget, if you want more True Crime Cast in your life, we do have a Patreon channel available, and you get a bonus episode each and every month. We also put all of our regular content in there early and ad-free. So go check it out. I think all the housekeeping stuff is out of the way. I'm excited to get into this case, Jamie. So I'm going to ask you to get the ball rolling.
Absolutely. So we're going to go back to before we were born, John.
Just barely for you, right?
Wow. Yes, but still.
My boy's got a birthday coming up next month.
Not a big one, though. It's just...
Hey, at our age, another birthday is a big birthday, buddy.
This just so happened to start, the story began 42 years ago, almost 43. And this was an extraordinarily cold day in Breckenridge, Colorado. Some people remember the weather was absolutely brutal. The temperatures fell to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And for those international listeners that don't do Fahrenheit, that is below 0 Celsius as well, but not 20. Others remember this day that was January 6th of 1982 as the night that 2 women went missing. 29-year-old Bobbie Jo Oberholtzer and 21-year-old Annette Schnee disappeared the day that they were walking along the road and hitchhiking. Annette was last seen around 4:30 that afternoon, and Bobbie Jo was last seen in Breckenridge at around 7:30 in the evening.
Bobbie Jo was described as a free-spirited hippie, which, I don't know, that's not the worst way to describe somebody. Like, I wish I was more free-spirited.
I think you throw free-spirited in there to make it sound nicer when you say hippie.
Yeah, just
that's what we're doing.
not a lot of cares in the world is
That's
what
not
I
what we're
think
doing.
of.
That's what people did to just describe Bobbie Jo.
Right. When I think of free-spirited, I just think of go with the flow, not a lot of stuff upsets you. I need to be more like that.
Sounds like a nice life, yeah.
She had dated Jeff Oberholtzer for a few years before they got married in 1977. And not long after that, Jeff says Colorado was calling to the newlyweds. So they moved out there and they settled down in the town of Alma, which is just 30 minutes south of Breckenridge. Jeff opened an appliance repair business and Bobbie Jo worked for a real estate company. And it was common for Bobbie Jo and many others in that area to hitchhike to work in the mornings.
On the evening of January 6th, Bobbie Jo was out celebrating a recent promotion with coworkers and friends. At approximately 6:21 p.m., she called her husband to say that she had a ride home and that she would be home soon. Jeff, who was at home waiting on her, watching TV, fell asleep while he was doing so, and he woke up around midnight and was shocked that Bobbie Jo wasn't home yet. She should have been home hours ago. He got a really bad feeling about what was going on, so he went out looking for his wife. He tried to report her missing, but Breckenridge police told him they couldn't do anything until she had been missing for 24 hours. We often rail against that and wonder why, but that was the case here. Jeff went home, and just hours later, he got a call from a local rancher. The rancher said that he found Bobbie Jo's driver's license on his property. Jeff immediately jumped in his vehicle and went to the ranch, and on the way, he saw Bobbie Jo's blue backpack on the side of the road. So at this point, he's hearing of different things that should be with his wife in random places where they shouldn't be. He stopped to pick up the backpack, and right beside it was her right glove and a tissue, both of which were covered in blood.
So, of course, this is just a terrifying scene that's playing out for Jeff, and he got a very uneasy feeling, which, if that's not an understatement, I don't know what is, right? But he did remember in the back of his mind that he gave Bobbie Jo a very large, heavy brass clip with a brass ring attached to it for her to use in self-defense while she was hitchhiking. And the blood, trying to give himself some hope, he was thinking the blood could have come from her hitting someone with that in self-defense. Bobbie Jo's friends formed a search party and then went looking for her. Around 3 p.m. on January 7th, they found Bobbie Jo's body in a snowbank. She had a bullet wound through her chest and a zip tie around her left wrist. An agent for the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, Jim Hartake, said that Bobbie Jo was fully clothed when she was found. An autopsy revealed that she was not sexually assaulted. Near her body, police found the brass clip that Jeff made for his wife in a small orange sock. Now, the detective said that it was just one of those mysterious things that you pick up at a crime scene that you keep until you know what it is, or you'll just never find out. So, yeah, that's kind of a mysterious thing for sure.
And I mentioned it being in the snow. Colorado is a beautiful, very diverse place in the middle of the Rocky Mountains. I've been to Denver at a baseball game, and you can be sweating and you feel like it's 1,000 degrees on the ground, but look over and see snow-capped mountains. So it's wonderful in that way. Actually, Denver is going to be the site of next year's Crime Con. We're going to
so
be
excited.
There. That's about an hour and a half from Breckenridge, so maybe a good spot to have conversations about this case. But we'll be there. We will share promo codes when we get those. Back to the story. Annette was 21 years old, and she was from Sioux City, Iowa. She had been living in Colorado for about a year when she disappeared. She was a housekeeper by day and a cocktail waitress by night and spent a lot of her time working. After Ann left her January 6th housekeeping shift at a local Holiday Inn, she went to the doctor and then hitchhiked to the drugstore. We keep mentioning hitchhiking here. It was such a common way to get around in the, I would say, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Would you say that's when hitchhiking kind of peaked?
Oh, yeah, I would think so. I mean, that's kind of what I think of when I think of that, yeah.
Yeah, because after that, it's we got into some stranger danger, and people got a little bit more hesitant to do so. But she was hitchhiking around town. She got her medicine at the drugstore, and she wasn't seen again after 4:45 p.m. when she left the drugstore that day.
I'm trying to keep a timeline in my mind. So she wasn't seen again after 4:45, and then the other
Bobbie Jo was last contacted around 6:21 when she had called her husband to say she had a ride home. Somebody said they saw her at 7:30, but still, it's just a few hours apart. But they're unrelated. They're not together.
Okay. So after she had missed 2 shifts at the Holiday Inn, a coworker ended up calling the police to report her missing, and that call would take place on January the 8th. Annette's sister, Cindy, remembers that missing work was not like her. Golly, she's working 2 jobs. She's working, it seems like, all day long and then into the night, so she's a very hard-working woman. She also recalls that their mother just wanted to know what happened to Annette and that no one could give her an answer. Police would end up following her trail, and she seemed to have just disappeared.
It was 6 months before they would find any evidence of what happened to Annette. This was July 3rd of 1982. A boy was out fishing and found the body of Annette Schnee in a stream. She was about 23 miles away from the last place she was seen in Breckenridge. There was no bullet discovered, but forensics did show that she had been shot one time in the back. Based on the trajectory of the round, it appeared Annette was shot as she was running away downhill from whoever was attacking her, running toward the stream. It's also believed that Annette had been sexually assaulted since the zipper on her jeans was broken and her shoes were on the wrong feet. But the body had been in the stream for so long, it was pretty impossible to find actual physical evidence that a sexual assault occurred. Obviously, it had been decayed and water had done things that it does, and as did animals and fish. So the body was in pretty bad shape when they found her and didn't get a full picture of what happened.
There was an autopsy, even though the body was just so decomposed, you couldn't really tell physically if she was assaulted. But Agent Hartake did notice something that completely changed the investigation. He had said, on her left foot, I noticed an orange booty. He said, and in my mind, I'm remembering that orange booty that was found at the top of the Hoser Pass, very close to where Bobbie Jo Oberholtzer's body was found. So it tied the two together. Bobbie Jo and Annette were now forever linked by a pair of these orange socks, and Annette's mom had just given these to her for Christmas. The 2 women were almost certainly killed by the same person.
And for one of Annette's socks to be with Bobbie Jo, you have to wonder if they were together for a long time. Did the killer just take the sock? And we're going to dive into that. But first, we're going to take a break and come back and start talking about the suspects in these murders and what we found out about the double missing women. As per common practice, the first suspect is the husband. So they look at Bobbie Jo's husband, Jeff Oberholtzer. For years, he was investigated. They did eventually clear him, but because he stayed in the area after the murder, he continued to be judged by his neighbors. And that's a stigma you can't get rid of if people believe you killed your wife and got away with it. Got a quote from Jeff that says, "It was very painful being under suspicion, not only from authorities, but also being tried in the court of public opinion. People didn't want a suspected murderer in their house." And I have to say, I would be weary as well until it was solved, even though there was no hard evidence that he was involved.
I bet those, especially those first few months, were agonizing for him. I mean, he had just lost his wife. Also, people are critical of him being potentially a murderer. And they don't know yet that in about 3 months, there's going to be a sock found at the scene of another murder that will tie to your wife's murder. So now are people looking at you as if you've murdered 2 women, or are they like, oh, I think we had it wrong? There's obviously something more sinister going on.
Yeah, I mean, my assumption, I guess I always assume the worst in people. I think they probably just associated that murder with Jeff as well.
As authorities put together the pieces of evidence, they began to believe the killer first picked up Annette while she was hitchhiking, and then he assaulted and killed her. During that assault, Annette lost one of her orange socks in the vehicle. Then the killer may have picked up Bobbie Jo and attempted to assault her too. And they believe that Bobbie Jo fought back with her brass clip. And when she fought, she somehow knocked the other orange sock out of the vehicle, landing near her body.
And I think that's a reasonable explanation, having seen the evidence in the crime scene, the way that things were laid out. And obviously it seemed like Bobbie Jo was dumped there with lots of other things. So I think that tracks, but we'll see if it plays out that way. For decades, all they had was their speculation about what could have happened and the blood types that were found at the scene. We didn't have DNA technology yet, certainly weren't using it in any kind of massive way. But in the year 2020, Park County Detective Sergeant Wendy Kipple read about genetic genealogy. Kipple submitted the DNA from the blood that was collected from the glove and the tissue found in Bobbie Jo's backpack. On January 9th, 2021, she got a phone call from the genealogist saying he had 2 names for her, Allen and Bruce Phillips. Bruce had never lived in Colorado, and as far as they knew, he had no ties to the area except Allen, who was in the area and actually still lived there. Allen Lee Phillips worked in the mines surrounding the area, and he still owned a mechanic shop. Now that she had a name, Kipple started researching who these people were and what potential tie they could have to these murders.
So all of this is taking place before files could go digital, right? Nowadays we have a database. We can just type in this guy's name and search, and everything we have in recent history. And when I say that, I'm really talking about like from the late 90s on is going to be in there. This crime happened back in the 80s. So detectives in today's time don't have a lot of access to those old records. So it took her hours to dig through old file cabinets until she finally found a file that had information regarding Phillips. So when she found it, she realized that he had been convicted of assault and burglary in 1973, 11 years before the murders of Annette and Bobbie Jo. In a signed confession, Phillips admitted to picking up a woman who was hitchhiking in Breckenridge. I mean, that's when I just put the file down and I go find this guy, right? Like, You are guilty of 2 murders, at least. But he said that he picked her up, stopped at an empty cabin along the road, pulled the girl from the car, and then hit her with a rock several times. This young woman got away and then reported him to the police, and he was eventually caught and then served 6 months in prison. In his confession, he said that he didn't know why he did these things. Obviously, he's acting on some sort of evil impulse, right?
And it doesn't just go away, right? We see anytime we talk about somebody who's killed multiple people, we see this type of escalation. It goes from one crime to another and slowly gets more and more violent. And I think that's what we're seeing here from Phillips after he got away with this initial assault. And we've said it before, John, but why are we so much easier on people who are bad at what they're trying to do? Like he obviously was trying to do more to this woman, but he didn't do it. So he got a lighter sentence than if he had been able to complete his mission.
You're right. And I mean, maybe it's time we really take a deep look at what's the heart of the law and what's the heart of your intent. If you were trying to kill someone, but they fought back and got away, you shouldn't have a lesser sentence than if you had actually carried it out, right?
That's what I would think.
In my opinion, I mean, sue me if I'm wrong.
No, we're rewarding people for being bad at murder. and I don't know. Anyway, as Kipple uncovered more and more about Phillips, she found one more stunning twist. On the night of the murders, again, January 6, 1982, during a blizzard, authorities were called in to rescue a truck trapped in a snowdrift on a mountain pass. The driver was using the truck headlights to signal SOS in Morse code in order to get attention and let people know he needed help. At that time, there was a sheriff flying overhead that saw the signal. He alerted the crew of the plane. They radioed down to dispatch, and they got somebody out there to help the truck driver. They sent the local fire chief, and he drove up there to rescue the truck. When he arrived, he saw his friend from the mines, Allen Lee Phillips.
Dave immediately noticed that Phillips had a large bruise on his face, but Phillips said that he fell against his truck while he was wandering around in the snow. But police now believe that Allen Phillips got this bruise when Bobbie Jo hit him with the brass clip that she had got from her husband. Stories of Phillips, the rescue truck driver, made local newspapers. One of those that ran was even placed right next to a story about Bobbie Jo's body being found.
Looking back, that's super eerie, but what are the odds of that? I guess they did happen on the same day, so it's two news stories on the same day, but to be right next to each other is fascinating to me. New investigators needed a DNA sample from Phillips now that they have this genetic match to a relative, not necessarily to Allen Lee Phillips. That's how the genealogy works. You're looking for relatives, but they needed to know directly. They followed Phillips around for nearly 2 months, waiting for him to throw out a napkin, to get a straw he had sipped on in the trash, food scraps, anything with DNA on it. It took longer than expected as Phillips was a homebody. He didn't go out a lot. He rarely took his trash out. Eventually, he did discard a Sonic bag at a post office, and officers pounced on it. They ran the DNA, and it was a direct match to the blood found on Bobbie Jo's glove.
Police arrested Allen Lee Phillips on January 24th, 2021, during a traffic stop. He was still working less than 20 miles away from where the bodies were found nearly 40 years ago. Phillips' double murder trial began on August 31, 2022. So in this trial, the defense team set out to plant seeds of reasonable doubt, and they did so by questioning the validity of the DNA and then pointed all the fingers to Jeff as far as who is guilty for these murders. They said that Jeff wanted to kill his wife, Bobbie Jo, because on the day before the murder, she brought home cold pizza. Now, this was just a random fact that was pulled in a statement that Jeff had made to police years earlier. And to be fair, I don't think the statement was, I wanted to kill my wife because she brought home a cold pizza. But, you know, it could have been him talking about one of his last memories with his wife. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, just recounting the last couple days of what happened.
They also claimed that the DNA evidence was not reliable because evidence had the opportunity to have been tampered with and mishandled over the years. But yeah, I think they're reaching for anything. And quite honestly, I mean, I know they have to represent their client, but at some point I question your morality when you're trying to help a guilty man go free. And I can't think of any reasonable doubt that I would have.
Right. But do you think if you were a defense attorney, like, what are your constitutional obligations to your client? I know there's attorney-client privilege, but if you find out not only are they guilty of this, they've killed 10 other people, what do you do with that information? Are you legally bound to keep it private? Do you have a duty to report? I would think it would be the former, actually. Or do you even have the right to say, you know what, I'm not working on this case because you're a horrible person?
I would hope that you are able to say, you know what, I'm going to walk away from this case. I think if I were in this situation and I had to defend him, I would say, look, this in your best interest, I would take any kind of deal the state offers you. So
Instead of
that's
this,
my advice. If you don't take my advice, I'm not representing you in trial.
instead of this like wacky defense that they're trying to put on that makes zero sense. And just as you may imagine, it only took the juror 4 hours and 45 minutes to come to a conclusion of their own. They found Allen Lee Phillips guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, felony murder, and kidnapping. So they really laid the charges on thick, which I think is exactly what they should have done in this situation. The prosecuting attorney, as they often do, ended up consulting with the victims' families about sentencing, and they pulled no punches. They said, please, if you can, we want to see him punished to the fullest extent of the law. And he was given 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. In case you're new here, consecutive sentences basically means they run back to back, so you will serve both of them. A lot of times they get concurrent sentences so that you're serving both sentences at the same time, so both victims can get justice. But in this scenario, he's serving back-to-back life sentences, which obviously means longer and longer. Just 6 months into his prison sentence, Phillips was found dead in his cell in the Arkansas Valley Correctional Facility. John, first of all, I find it interesting they sent him to Arkansas. There's a very, is popular the right word, a very big supermax in Colorado there already that a lot of the worst killers go to.
Yeah. I mean, not trying to make it funny, but off the top of my head, I'm like, Colorado's too pretty for a monster like this. So send them to Arkansas. It just fits.
Yeah, I don't know where that facility is.
As long as it's not the Ozarks, it's safe to say it's an atrocity.
That's fair. I'm down with that. They did rule his manner of death as suicide, so it was determined that in his cell while incarcerated for these crimes, he did take his own life.
At the sentencing, they often will let victims' family or loved ones give victim impact statements. And Annette's mom was able to read a statement about her daughter and the loss that their family suffered. And she would say, quote, "Annette was so beautiful, so loving, and everybody loved being around her. I miss my daughter. I was never able to see her grow into a woman, start a career, or have a family. But I can finally be at peace knowing that the man who took all of that away will be going away to a place he deserves to be. I'm 89 years old and I've waited 40 years for this day to come." End quote.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a super emotional quote coming from an emotional place. And I think that's partly why they have those victim impact statements. And I thankfully have never had a family member that was a victim of a violent crime like this. But I would imagine that I would have a lot I would like to say to that individual. And we have a part of our legal process that provides that opportunity. And they definitely took advantage of that. Sometimes people will do just this and lash out. Sometimes people will come forward and offer forgiveness, which is more rare, but still happens. And I don't know, it's just a time for them to have their final words for the person that took their loved one. And I think she really encapsulated all that a family member would want to say. And waiting for 40 years. I mean, we obviously talk about the Golden State Killer. This was pretty much solved in the exact same manner as the Golden State Killer. It was connected through the genes of a relative. They followed him around till they got the evidence they needed to test the DNA. By the way, we're going to be covering the Golden State Killer here pretty soon. But I think we're going to see more and more of these in the next little bit, John.
I was going to say, we could probably just start a podcast dedicated to crimes solved by familial DNA, because I would say over the next 10 years, I would love to know how many cold cases are going to be solved. And I'd love to know how many cold cases up until today have been solved because of products like this on the market.
I think the Golden State Killer being captured in this way really kind of overshadowed the others like this one, who was solved in the same manner. And not too long after, but it was after the Golden State Killer had been captured and put on trial. But you're right. And we now see 23andMe getting in trouble for some things. There are some other, and that's where we primarily get that, right? Is those ancestry websites. I wonder if people are going to start protecting their DNA more and more just in case they ever need to be hidden. So, like, I don't know if somebody thinks, you know what, I may grow up to kill people. I'm going to make sure nobody in my family does ancestry.com. Like, I know that sounds silly, but are we going to start seeing people avoid it for those types of reasons?
It's definitely possible that they could put some regulations on there similar to like HIPAA or something that you would, I hope that if they do regulate it, that it's, do you consent to this being public or not? And people can hit yes or no. Right. But then like, that's still, you're still going to be able to solve crimes through that. It's just not going to be as easy. Right. So like if you and I are like fourth cousins, we're going to share DNA, but they might have to investigate more people back in that lineage to try to find who I am and how I'm linked to you. Right.
Right.
Hopefully that's the case. Maybe I'm just making up junk science, but I thought that's how DNA worked.
Yeah. And it's, just wonder, makes me think of, am I going to be contacted at some point and say, hey, your DNA popped off. Not that we think it's you, but it's so-and-so you're related to. Do you know where we can find them?
Oh my gosh.
That's a phone call I don't think you want to get.
No, but I know members of my family that if I got that phone call, I can't say I would be surprised.
Yeah. It's like, ooh, well, I thought this was coming.
Yeah. I thought you'd call me sooner.
But I am obviously super happy that this was solved. This is a family, a couple families that just lived for so long without answers. Obviously it does not bring them back to solve this case. And it also doesn't change the fact that Jeff's entire life was upended because he was looked at as a murder suspect. So it doesn't right the wrongs. It didn't fix the previous afflictions caused by it, but eventually those living got answers. And now we know the person who did it is not going to be helping or hurting, rather, not going to be hurting anybody else.
Sorry to keep going here and processing this, but man, sometimes when investigations go poorly, we bash the investigation, but with this one, I don't know what else they could have done to bring this one to a close sooner. But first off, shout out that they kept all the evidence. They kept the orange sock, the blood-soaked napkin or tissue. Like in the 1982 era, they had no idea that one day this was going to be able to be tested and they could find out who's responsible based on this blood. Shout out to Bobbie Jo for fighting back, because without her fighting back and making the perp bleed, we may never have known.
Absolutely.
So there's just so many things that happened in the course of this murder that if one thing is taken away, it may still never be solved.
Huge props to Sergeant Wendy Kimball for the work done here. And obviously it sets a precedent for future cases to be solved in a similar way. So if you have other cases you've heard of that have been solved this way, I would love to know about them just to get kind of the scale, like John said, of how often is this really happening? Because I think it could be happening a lot. And you have to wonder as investigators, how much of your time do you spend going back to those old cases and be like, you know what, I think I can like solve 10 cases in the next year that are cold cases, but you also have those fresh ones in front of you. So it's always been a balancing act, but with the temptation of, I now have something that's going to help me solve those. It'll be interesting to see how that's balanced.
That would be just such a fascinating job, is to be a cold case detective where you're only working those cases. It would be, I'm sure, very challenging, but very rewarding when stuff like this happens.
Yep. Guys, we appreciate you hanging out with us throughout this case. Always love to talk about cases where there is some semblance of justice. We don't get that every time, but we did get that here. And we will continue to update you in our show. We do case updates on every Patreon episode. Anytime we get to know that something has changed from a case we previously covered, we try to get that information out. So just be on the lookout, follow us on social media, and we'd love to engage with you over there.
Until next crime, this has been True Crimecast.
You've listened to True Crimecast, distributed by Stoveleg Media. Check out stoveleg.com to find out more about your hosts and to find other podcasts to listen to. Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.